Well, back in 1999 when we started the company, we had this idea that sort of as distribution was changing for media and broadcast was coming to an end and people could sort of pass around anything that they found compelling, we had this idea that social causes and things that people valued were the things that were going to get passed around, because people would rather pass around something they were passionate about than an ad for sneakers, say. And so we were just looking for ways, how do you put stuff out there that people will want to put out into their social networks? And we tried lots of different things. We were making little movies back in 2000 when you couldn't even use sound hardly. And certain things really worked and certain things didn't. We'd get 1 million views on something and then something else would flop. And we really were trying to figure out what's the difference here? Why are certain things working and other things not? And it was actually in doing a spoof of Star Wars that turned me on to this idea that it's really about that story that you're telling. And even though we were on the edge of exploring digital tools and what's possible in communication, it was really whether you had some of those ancient formulas working for you that lit up in people's minds. This is a great story. This is something I can relate to. This is something I can make mine. Well, I think I have a couple different definitions. One is that really a story is a way to persuade somebody of your worldview, but you don't do it just by spouting facts and figures and proclamations at them. You do that by really bringing them into a scene where characters' lives are playing out, and you get them to feel what it's like to be in that world. And by watching other characters and seeing what happens to them, they start to say, oh, that could be me, that could be my life as well, and they learn that lesson for themselves. And that's what a literal story is to me. But as a branding tool, a story is really looking at your organization or your brand as an unfolding story between you and your audiences, and really managing it like a story would be managed, so that every communication you put out is built on a moral of the story. Just like a good story puts all the characters in conflict to illustrate a truth about the world, brands should be pushing all their communications to illustrate a core resonant truth, and that truth should be based on values. Just like great stories help us replicate values in each other's minds, great brands are also based on values. They teach a core truth and they align all their communication to be this unfolding story. Like, people intuitively get that if you, for instance, tell a story about how great you are, no one really cares. If I tell a story about how great you can be, people say, oh, wow, that's mine. I want to make that mine. So clients really get that. But yeah, breaking that old habit of talking about all your accomplishments, all your resources, all of your theories of change, breaking that habit and really figuring out, how do we talk about what matters to the people around us? How do we talk about and tell their story? It takes a lot of work. But I think now that we are past that broadcast era where our audiences are just captive and have to just sit there and listen to whatever we say, people realize that it's very urgent that we become relevant in our audience's life. It's not a one-way conversation anymore. Well, so I talk a lot about living your values or living the truth that the story you're trying to tell. And I think one of the easiest ways to tell if someone's doing sort of social branding that just looks good, or if at their core they really are the kind of company that you would want to support, is not to just look at the stories they tell and not just to look at the social programs that they support, but look to see if what they're actually creating, how the thing that they're creating, how they are in their communities, is that all aligned with their values? So it's one thing to say, hey, we support young girls, but if the product has nothing to do with supporting young girls and the actual activities besides giving money have nothing to do with it, then I don't think that there's really that kind of values alignment. So it's really about, does it go to the core of what we exist in the world to do? But at the same time, I do think that more positive marketing is just good for the world. We've already seen what 50 years of really negative inadequacy marketing has done, is created a world of kind of consumers who just buy. And if all our stories out there are telling you, you suck, well, that creates a kind of rough society, right? So having a lot of stories about telling you how great you can be, whether or not the product really is so great, I think actually does shift the world into a more positive place, because our media landscape really does shape our sense of selves, and we've gotten a pretty nasty media landscape out there. So just shifting it in itself, I think, is a positive. Certainly, first is tell stories that make your audiences believe that they can be something better than they are, that they can reach for something great. Don't talk about how great you are, talk about how great they can be. That's sort of the number one, and I think people get that right away. The second is, don't be afraid to show your humanity. We're all used to taking on this sort of broadcaster's voice when we communicate professionally that we grew up listening to. And in the old days, when only a few people had access to the television or the radio, they could sort of boom in the voice of God and everyone would just listen because they're like, oh, they're on the radio, they must know something. Now we really expect our storytellers to be human beings. And so when you shift into that professional mode of communication and leave behind your own humanity, you lose something. And so people really expect brands to speak in a human voice. And if you can't figure out what that human voice is and really commit to it, I think you lose that connection to make a real kind of human connection with your audience.